Well, hello and welcome. This is Why Host a Village at Soularize 2021. And we have just a great group coming in. You'll be hearing some dinging, but that just means there's more interaction activity. We're so glad that you're here. Today, I am joined with Shayna Metzner, who is our co-producer, and then Amy Butler and Brian McLaren. In a moment, we'll have them introduce themselves. Just to let you know, Soularize it's celebrating its 20th anniversary this year as a pop-up event, and it's always been known as a learning party. And the other part that we realize is that who has that learning party been for? And we found that it's really been spiritual innovators. I don't know if you know the innovation curve, but there's the innovators, the early adopters, and there's the chasm, and then there's the late adopters and such. And as we've kind of reviewed, the types of people that have been attracted to be a part of this gathering have been people who are really kind of thinking a little bit more on the edges, a little bit more outside the box, which is the place I love to live. And so I love to host this and be just available in whatever way I can. I want you to know that Soularize has never been about green rooms. It's always been about people just hanging and enjoying. I also want you to know it's not a personal vehicle for any of us. In fact, I've never even spoke, at it or keynoted or whatever. It's always been something where I've tried to facilitate the voices, especially voices that don't look, smell, or sound like me. So that's my hope, is that we can continue that tradition as we move forward. All right. Today, the main thing we're going to be talking about is the idea of why host a village. Last week, we did why showcase your art. Next week, we'll be talking about why present a startup pitch. And after that, the fourth week, we'll be doing why submit a workshop idea. So if any of you guys are interested in any of those others, we'll be doing that. And then after that, we'll be doing how. So we've got Alon Babchek from Glean Network, who's going to actually be doing how to do a pitch, a startup pitch for Soularize. And he'll be doing a whole hour on, the best techniques and the ideas. So we don't want people to just feel like they're not supported. So today we're not going to get into the how do a village. We'll talk about a lot of it and any questions you have with that. But a little bit later on this month, we will be doing how to host a village. How can you create that? And what do you need to make that happen? And we want to support you in any way you can. My hope is that by the end of this time, you will have considered whether you had 5 people or 500 people to maybe host a Soularize event in your own community. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that. So, Shayna, would you like to say something? Mm-hmm.
No, not really. But thank you so much, Spencer. Thanks so much. This is awesome to have everybody here. I think we should get into letting Brian and Amy introduce themselves.
Great.
Amy, why don't you
Okay.
go first?
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Butler. It's good to see your faces. Brian, it's so good to see you. I am a pastor in Washington, D.C., and I'm also working on a project called Invested Faith, which is a fund that seeks to redirect the assets of institutions that are at the end of their life cycle to the work of social entrepreneurs, sort of reinventing community and the church. So I also like to live on the edge, and it's a pleasure to be talking with all of you who are the same.
And I'll jump in. Great to see everyone. Great to see you, Amy and Spencer, after thinking 20 years ago for the first Soularize is just amazing. I was a pastor in the Washington, D.C. area for about 24 years. During that time, I started writing some books. I live in Southwest Florida now. And I'm married and we have 4 adult children and 5 amazing grandkids.
That is crazy, isn't it? Great. Gracie just turned 20 last week and Alden's up and out. It just is amazing. But that's the other part, is that many of us have had these beautiful, wonderful relationships. I don't know if you've gone to conferences, but who knows, maybe there was a keynote speaker that just made a huge impact on you. But in reality, it's those conversations that are happening in villages, in the hallways, and so even as we've scheduled the Soularize agenda, we have a good 2 hours every time we take a break, whether it's for lunch or a break or whatever, so that people can have those conversations. And so, yeah, Brian, perhaps we could riff a little bit here. Again, I don't want it to be like, oh, yeah, remember back when or whatever, but there is an ethos. There's a reason why we're doing what we're doing, and to try to inspire people as they think about doing their villages. But 20 years ago, it was just less than 30 days after 9/11. And it was kind of such a time as this. And Soularize has always been a pop-up event. And I think coming out of the pandemic and all of the kind of political unrest of the last year, and so many different things that have been happening, it might be such a time as this that we get some innovators together to spiritually think about a theme. And our theme this year is humane spirituality. And we'll be talking about that in a moment. But Brian, your personal experience with Soularize, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so first, Spencer, thanks for the invitation to be nostalgic. A lot of people my age impose their nostalgia on everyone else, whether they want it or not. So it's nice to get asked, and it's great to see all of you, a few old friends and some folks I haven't met before. And I don't want to make any assumptions, so I'll just give you a little bit of personal background. I grew up in a super fundamentalist right-wing background in the 1950s and 60s. When I say right-wing, actually, I just mean theologically conservative Protestant. Back then, what we now know as the religious right would never have entered most people's imagination. Even though we were very political, we said that we weren't, and we actually didn't think we were. We didn't realize back then that by not talking about things you were that you identified as political, you were making a huge political commitment and usually mystifying yourself and your followers about that commitment. But we were really oriented toward the Bible and Jesus and going to heaven when we die. I went through I was on my way out from that. That just didn't fit me. I had a very dramatic kind of conversion experience in the Jesus movement that some of you maybe have read about in a history book somewhere in the 1960s and 70s. And I ended up becoming a church planter and a pastor. But something happened along the way to me. In the 1970s, I was in graduate school, and I remember exactly the essay by an incredible Southern novelist named Walker Percy, who'd written an essay where he mentioned this term postmodern, and I'd never seen that term before. I had no idea what it meant, but I could tell by the way he was talking about meaning and his craft as a novelist and his Catholic faith. I could tell that there was something about him that I liked and I got. Fast forward, 15 years or so, and I helped start this new church. And a lot of the people who were coming to our church, I realized that they fit what Walker Percy had written about in the actually he'd written about it probably in the 60s, but that I read in the 1970s about this term postmodern. And I could just tell that everything about the way I'd been introduced to Christian faith was answering a set of questions that I didn't feel I was asking or people around me were asking. That was based on a set of assumptions I didn't think I believed anymore, and was oriented toward preserving something that I didn't think was worthy of being preserved, and or some things that I didn't think were worthy of being preserved. And that created a kind of spiritual crisis for me. In 1995, 96, I started writing a book. I had no idea I would ever write more than one book. I was not even sure I would try to get it published, but I was trying to keep my own sanity. And I started writing a book. And when it got a publisher and was about to come out, I said to my wife, when this book comes out, I'm going to lose all my friends. And the truth is I lost a few who thought that I'd gone over some dangerous line. But something happened in 1998 that I'm going to mention just because to me, in my experience, it was the first sort of door that then 20 years ago Soularize really helped open that door even wider. And there was a gathering in near Santa Fe, New Mexico, that was called, it was about reimagining and reinventing and so on. And there were over 400 young leaders there. And I remember thinking, I found my people. I'm not the only one. I might be crazy, but there's a bunch of other crazy people too. And what started to happen after that book came out is that I started being approached by all these other people who had felt the same way. I thought I was the only crazy person. And in 2001, when Spencer put out an invitation to a learning party, I just thought the door is opening wider. And something that Spencer knew is that to help people learn new things and to help people develop new kinds of relationships and explore new territory, you have to do everything differently. You have to bring people together differently. You have to structure your schedule differently. You just have to tweak an awful lot of things or throw things out and start over again. And Spencer, what you said about important meetings happening in the hallways and so on, that certainly became the reality. Parker Palmer has a way of talking about how movements develop. And he says the first stage, the first step of a movement is when individuals say, I will be divided no more, meaning I won't present one face to the world out there and have another face back here. I'm going to come out to the front and say, this is what I actually think, or this is the question I'm asking, or this is what I am told to pretend that I know, but that I don't really know. And that process, when one person comes out, other people come out and they form critical conversations. And that's what began to happen. Critical, meaning that they critique, critical that they allow critical thinking, but not just critical, also creative. And the sense of creativity that Soularize fostered, I'll never forget. One of the things that Spencer did at one of the Soularize gatherings was he invited me to be one of the presenters or conversation leaders. And he also invited a fellow named Richard Rohr. I think at that point I had read one of Richard's books called Things Hidden, but I'd certainly never met him and really had no hope of meeting him because Protestants tended to run in Protestant circles and Catholics ran in Catholic circles. And Spencer, I don't even know if you remember this, but Spencer said, Brian, one of my main things I'm most excited about is I want you and Richard to meet each other. So I put you two at a table for lunch and I want you guys to be sure you get a chance to talk. And so a friendship developed there with Richard that's continued until this day and created all kinds of cross-pollination where Richard's originally Catholic audience was introduced to some of my work. I was introduced to some of his Catholic audience and the riches that Richard brought from Franciscan spirituality and the theological work of St. Bonaventure and others that Protestants like me never paid attention to. That was incredibly powerful. And then there was other instincts that Spencer had with the ooze.com, creating online conversations before I think most people realized how important those would be. And of course, in some ways, COVID-19 caught everybody up on the fact that sometimes we're going to have to conduct almost all of our work online. And so super, super important. But there's one other thing I wanted to say that really in some ways creates the bridge to what's happening now with these villages and this emphasis on social entrepreneurship and creative alternative forms of business and the kind of work now that Amy is also leading the way on, having come through her own journey in this process. Like a lot of you, I saw November of 2016 as a cataclysmic moment. Not only because I felt that we had just elected a narcissistic demagogue who had the potential to destroy American democracy and maybe bring down the world with it, but also because the religious community, the white religious community, showed its true colors in its sycophancy to this person. And then to watch in 2016, the number of white evangelicals who supported Donald Trump It went down in a few places, and thank God in some critical swing states, but it went up in most places. And watching that process happen, I felt that reality was deconstructing something I still believed. And that here's what I believed. And I may still believe it. I'm not sure I do. I may believe it again. But right now, I'm pretty sure I don't believe it. And here's what it is. I used to believe that theology was the biggest framework that sets the stage for how people think. And then within their theology, they have economics and politics and education and all these other little domains that they give meaning and framework to within theology. And you can see why, for me, as someone who writes about theology, I would see it that way, because that's kind of how I had dedicated my life. And in a sense, that's how I was making a living. But here's where the irony comes. I think in the years following 2016, I stopped believing that theology is the big framework that drives people's thinking. And I started to believe that it was economics. I started to believe that economics is the big framework, and people develop a theology and a philosophy and a politics and all the rest that help them survive in their economic system. Now, that might sound really cynical and really depressing. I'm not depressed or cynical about it. I just think that may be actually how the world works. I'll just tell you very quickly, when I started thinking about this, I called a very famous economist who I know, named David Corton, who is not a religious person, deeply spiritual person, but certainly wouldn't call himself a Christian or anything like that. And I think he probably would identify as a socialist. I don't know, but I called David. We became friends some years ago. And I said, David, here's what I'm thinking. And he said, we were on Zoom, of course, during COVID. He says, oh, Brian, don't tell me that. Don't tell me that. He said, because if you think religious fundamentalists are dangerous, wait till you meet economic fundamentalists. That's who I've spent my career with. He says, if you think people are stuck in their religious thinking, I can't tell you how stuck they are in their theological thinking. I'm sorry, in their economic thinking. And all that's to say that even if that hunch is even partially right, I think what these last 20 years have told us is that theology gets led around by the nose by politicians, and those politicians are probably led around by the nose by economic interests. And if we want to see deep system change, and if we want to see 1,000 creative flowers bloom, I think it's smart for us to keep our spiritual roots, to keep our theological thinking intact. It's not an either or, but I think we have to realize the power of business and economics and entrepreneurship and all the rest. So that's maybe a good place for me to stop.
Well, what's fascinating about that is that intuitively, like Brian, you think this stuff through. You know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of an intuitive person, you know. So like with Soularize this year, again, such a time as this, what's emerging is that we do have the startup pitches. You know what I mean? Like, they're intuitively, I guess we've kind of thought that if we're going to create a humane spirituality, we're going to have to be thinking about how we are going to do new forms of everything. And I think whether we call it Christian or not, it's spiritual. So like even within our startup pitches, Alon Babchak, who runs Glean, which is a Jewish incubator out of Manhattan that I've gone through. He's a wonderful partner in this, along with Charles Lee and Danielle. And, you know, there's a new focus, you know, I mean, because like 20 years ago, we did a Native American potlatch with 30 different tribes, and Richard was there, you know, and I remember as a Franciscan, you know, the tribes literally looked at him and said, you know, Father Sarah didn't do us any favors. In fact, we're still looking for the good news. And Richard was able to absorb that, but it was also absorbed in the room, you know. Or we did the film festival. Remember, we co-founded the DeMa Film Festival, rented the EMP and showed it there. You know, there was all of the arts that tend to lead things, you know, it's like the banner kind of thing. And I feel like now, not only will we have the arts leading us, new filmmakers and spoken word and other things that will create these villages, but it'll also be connected to the idea of the startups. And so I love what you're saying, because again, you know, you never know what this is going to be. We just try to create a framework and see what will happen. And in a lot of ways, you know, in the 90s, or, you know, who knew about the internet and whatever, and the ooze just happened to be at the right place at the right time, quite honestly. I'm wondering if maybe Soularize, with what you're kind of talking about with the villages, because again, the villages are designed for spiritual entrepreneurs. Like literally, I think I've said we're trying to create the low bar of entry. So it's really, there's an app you can use anywhere in the world. So people who are isolated, they can still be part of the large village of a community. And the only reason why we're charging $20 or $19.95 is that the thing that was the downfall of the ooze was about 70 years into it, we just started getting trolls and flamers, and they destroyed the community. So really the 1995 is a way in which we say we're able to control this community. And if you break community rules, we'll give you your money back, but we'll also ban you, because it's a private place where we can have conversation together as we lead up to the event. So really, it's not the 3-day event. That'll be the celebration, but it's all of the working together. And so as we think about people building, you know, villages, this is a place where people, again, there's a little bit of the logistics, but again, a low bar. We're saying, hey, for $99 or $100, right? You can actually stream all the content and be a part of Soularize in your local community. Now, you don't have to stream it all. A lot of people are going to be in other countries and other different time zones, whatever, but they can pick and choose what they want out of it, almost create a mixtape, you know, of different arts and ideas. And then they could charge whatever they want. They could charge $100 for a person to come, and because they might be doing a meal, or they might be bringing in a DJ, or they might be doing a service project in the area. And we'll all celebrate that around the world in these 3 days. You know, I've even heard of somebody who was thinking about doing Soularize as a weekly event, you know, for their community, and then having the big celebration in October. I don't know how people will do it. But again, we're trying to create, you know, the startups, really kind of releasing the spiritual innovators, entrepreneurs, in trying to make this whatever it should be, because we don't really know what it will be. Yeah, Shayna.
Awesome, awesome. So Spencer went off the agenda, so that's okay. He's very excited about our Soularize coming up. I really loved what Brian was talking about, deep system change, and I really think it's a great segue into Amy's new model that she's looking at about reinvesting, you know, money into new faith models. So Amy, did you want to kind of comment on where Brian was going with the system change?
Sure. It's almost overwhelming to be in this conversation with all of these brains and energy, but invigorating. So I grew up in a very conservative evangelical home in Hawaii. My parents are still very conservative, and being the rebel I joined the mainline church. That was my rebellion. I loved the liturgy, and have spent all of my career in mainline institutions, mostly historic institutions, including the Riverside Church. And I have always sensed that we are living in this moment where the church needs to shift in big and huge ways. And right now in America, at least, people are clinging to what they knew because of fear, and because we can't see clearly what's coming. And I don't tell you how many times I've heard people say, oh my gosh, the church is dying, the church is dying. You know what? The church is never going to die, because we all need a place to find community, and we all need a place to ask the bigger questions of life. And so it's up to us, and Soularize is a great opportunity to do this, to try and figure out what some of those new models are. When you're in the institutional church, anybody who will understand this ongoing tension between an institution, which by its very definition is supposed to be permanent, and then the work of God's Spirit, who we understand to be ever creating. That's always a living tension for us. How do we help our institutions shift with the wind of God's Spirit? And now, even after COVID, even more, how do we have hard conversations about building legacies to what we have lived together as we redirect our assets to find different ways to be the church in the world in real and significant ways? It's been interesting for me working on my Invested Faith project. You can read more about that on investedfaith.org if you're interested. But I've been contacted by some major corporations who want to know where the church is going. Like, in the 1950s, it was the church that was running the schools and building the hospitals and starting, institutions that made social impact. And there's a question now about where people of faith are showing up. Mostly, we understand people of faith to be showing up at the Capitol on January 6th. So that's a big problem. And the world is waiting to see how we are going to show up to live what we say we believe in the world. And if there's any way that we can help each other remember that this fear could be channeled into an energy of excitement and anticipation about what lies ahead, that will be some amazing work that could be done. And I really feel like in the villages could be the groundwork for, holding each other's hands through the fear as we take steps into the future that we can't quite see, but we know is there because we know what it means to be human in the world and to engage with the Spirit of God that is ever creating. So that's a few of my thoughts on it. I'd love to hear from some of you.
Yeah, anybody who has a comment or thought on where we've been so far, go ahead, just unmute your mic and share your thoughts.
Can you just say more, Amy? I'm just really fascinated. How I haven't to your website yet. How does Invested Faith work? Like just a little kind of elevator speech of what you're doing.
Sure. So a few years ago, I read an article in The Guardian that said the church in America is in possession of assets that exceed all of Microsoft, Google, and Apple combined, trillions and trillions of dollars in institutions, in land, in buildings. And as any of you who have led historic institutions will know, those institutions are the low-hanging fruit for developers, right? So we are finding that our institutions, as they've been expressed, are dying or diminishing. And because of a theology of scarcity with which we live, we are spending our money down to the last dollar, closing the doors, and being sad about the church's failure. And I just think that there's another narrative here and we have to claim it. So what if you were a church of 15 people in the middle of rural Pennsylvania and the church is not going to come back. There's no building a coffee shop and making this, making the pews full again. But this has been such an amazing place that has done so much work in the world in the name of the gospel, and how sad it would be to just close the doors and go home. What you could do is sell your property and give it away to a bunch of nonprofits, and then the money's gone. Or you could create a legacy project and move your assets into a fund that regularly gives out small micro grants to social entrepreneurs who are doing the work of healing the world in different expressions of church. And so the idea is to repurpose those assets and to get them out on the ground to the folks who are making pitches at Soularize, the scrappy entrepreneurs who are imagining a new way of being the church in the world. I don't know if it'll take off you know, we've got a bunch of initial investors and things are going well. We just gave out our first set of grants, but I know it's a conversation we need to be having. So
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. So I think that really answers, as Brian was talking about, new models. Like we have to imagine, we have to go to places that we can't imagine. And I think that Soularize has done a great job of providing a place for that, a container for things to go wild, so to speak. So on that note, Spencer, you want to talk a little bit about the theme this year?
Yes, absolutely. So basically, the theme that we're playing with, and it's a loose idea, is humane spirituality. And I think this may take the whole deal full circle, actually. And that is, for whatever reason, I have had a difficult time listening to people talk about sin. I've watched people say one thing is sin and the other group saying, no, that's good. And then another group say that's good. And the other person say it's sin. And I look and I go like, man, that is so confusing to me. And you can go through any scenario you want. But typically if you think in the political arena, again, not to get political, but the idea of the border, let's say, you start to talk about the idea, well, it's just, wrong for people to jump the line and get in front. And quite honestly, I can kind of see that perspective. And I have people who've done it right that kind of feel that, you know what I mean? Like, but then there are others that are like, yeah, but look at the separation of children and da, 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 and I see that too. So the place where I'm at right now is actually thinking about sin in the sense of, does it feel like it's humane? So when I'm in that conversation, I don't want to try to solve the border issue. You know what I mean? But I look in and I see kids separated from their families. And I don't care what political spectrum it is, each one of us deep within our heart, we have a sense of that's wrong. That's inhumane. And I think we can all call that sin. You know what I mean? Like that's wrong. I don't know about your political agenda or how you're going to answer that, but that's not good. The psychological damage that's created in a small child being separated makes me emotional. It's just like, that's just wrong. But what's humane is to watch and see a family reunited. Don't you get a tear when you see that, even after war or whatever, you reunite, it's just like remember all the surprise things with a guy coming back from Afghanistan and he's greeting his wife and his kids and you see him reunited, you go like, that's right. That's good. That's Oprah, you know what I mean? Kind of a thing. There's that sense. So I think as we start to look at the projects and the ideas that we want to create, it's trying to create another or a better or new humane spirituality. Again, I'm not talking about Christian or, Hindu or any, I'm talking about humane spirituality that I think spans all faith communities, right? And in doing it, I have a rough idea, but the invite for artists and entrepreneurs and workshop leaders is to riff on the idea more in a jazz way, right? Everybody can go and it can go anywhere it needs to go. All right. But what I'm playing with it right now is humane spirituality, I think, restores human dignity to both the oppressed and the oppressor. Do you see what I'm saying? Sometimes in social justice, we can do as much damage as good. Or sometimes we don't have to look at our part in what it is that is causing this. And the whole question right now of economics, as we think about this, I think we've got to look at it holistically. And we've got to realize, that sometimes, we're causing the oppression, and we have to own that and work that. And if we're the entrepreneur or the artist and we're writing or singing or speaking or creating new projects around it, I think we have to not only think about how we can create justice, but we also have to bring a deep spiritual idea to the question as well, which is
Right.
restoring human dignity.
Awesome, Spencer. What do you think, Brian? What are your thoughts on humane spirituality?
You know, when I saw that phrase, I thought, what a beautiful way to frame what we need going forward. One of the things I thought about is there's a well-known Baptist theologian named David Gushee, and he recently wrote a book. He comes from a similar background to many of us, and he recently wrote a book. I think it's called After Evangelicalism. And when he gets to the end of the book, he says, I don't know what I want to call myself. I guess I'll call myself a Christian humanist. And I thought, what a beautiful phrase. And of course, some of us would know that there's a deep history to Christian humanism. And it goes back to Erasmus and Thomas More and many others hundreds and hundreds of years ago who were watching religious conflict in their day. And what for them, a win wasn't say, how can I make sure my side wins over the other? For them, a win was how can we all sides move to a more humane way of living? And to me, there's so much about this that's important, but it says, how can artists communicate? How can artists contribute to a more humane world? I remember some years ago, I went to a movie, and when I came out of the movie, I just felt dirty because it felt like this entire movie was about revenge. It was the satisfaction was when the good guy committed violence to the bad guy. And I thought, I mean, maybe that's better than it could have been. I mean, it could have been worse maybe, but it sure didn't take us to any place beyond where we always are, thinking that violence solves our problems. And so you think, how can the arts contribute to a more humane world? And then a huge question, how can business contribute to a more humane world? I have a son who's an entrepreneur. He started a company a couple of years ago, has over 100 employees. And I know he wakes up every day. His first thought is not, how can I make as much money as possible? His first thought is, how can I help these 100 people have a really great life? How can I be a humane boss and see my work as partnership with them to do good in the world too? And that to me is the vision that we have. I mean, and this is where, especially when we think of seeding and forming new faith communities, whatever they're called, they could be called churches, they could be called villages, they could be called all different kinds of things. But when you bring people together to say, how can we all maximize and support one another in our contributions to a more humane world? That to me is super inspiring.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Brian. What, Amy, what are some thoughts that come to your mind with humane spirituality?
Yeah, I think that that's a provocative phrase because it's going to make folks from more conservative circles perk up their ears. But this is part of moving boldly into a new future and being assured that God is well at work, whether we're going to join in or not. One of the things that really inspired my project is I met some friends in England, actually, who worked on a project called Seedbed, and they spent many years giving out small grants to social entrepreneurs and really seeding the community of social entrepreneurs in Great Britain. And I asked them how they decided who they gave money to. And one of the men said, "We believe that where there is good, there is God. And that's where we start." And I think when I hear the word humane spirituality, I think, what would happen is if we decided to recognize the goodness in the world as the work of God and then join in wherever we see it. That's what it sounded like to me, Spencer, when you were explaining it.
Yeah. And again, I'm not trying to make a particular definition, but I want to do just a starting point, for people to play with it and interpret. And it was fascinating. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Anyone else have just a riff they want to throw in just as a thought?
I mean, I just want to say personally, as a non-professional Christian and a partner helping work with Spencer and Soularize over the years, when he called me up in back in February and say, "Hey, dude, it's 20-year reunion. You want to get the band back together?" And our theme is humane spirituality. I mean, for me, I knew it'd be a crazy ride, but I knew that it would be worth it if we were going to pursue humane spirituality. It just resonated. I just feel like the religious have not been shown as particularly humane in the media. And that has been the major message. And I think people are running from religion. I know my friends are because they're not known as particularly humane people. And I think that's heartbreaking. And so I love that we're bringing so many different expressions, like Brian was saying, the arts, like Amy's saying, different mainline churches, like we need to reimagine and take back, what is truly the essence of God.
Just again, I don't want to riff too much, but I have a little saying. I say, perhaps in trying to be godly, we've forgotten what it means to be human. And I actually, I mean, anybody want to talk about this, I'll go off any day with you, where I actually think Jesus wasn't trying to teach us to be godly. He left all that behind. I think he was trying to teach us how to be absolutely human, to the point of literally on the cross. I think the most humane thing you could do when people, uh, uh, you know, uh, came after you politically and religiously, is to look at them from a cross and say, forgive them. Their inhumanity is showing. They don't even know how inhumane they are. And I will then, an example, be humane, and my spirit will be humane, even from a cross, to say, I wish you knew. I wish you knew. I mean, I think that's the most human thing, the best human thing we could ever do. So sorry. Yeah,
Awesome.
Kat.
Wonderful.
Um, Hi, everyone. I've never been on this call before, but I've read a lot of your work, so I'm really honored to be in this group. I'm part of a network from Santa Barbara down to San Diego, and I'm affiliated with a nonprofit called Creative Visions, and they're creative activists, and a lot of Christians come through there and pop in, but I'm kind of the resident scholar for teaching Psalm 23 and the Beatitudes on a consistent basis, and I blend it with exercise, and I'm an avid swimmer, so I'm always in the ocean. Anyway, all this to say, there is so much going on, and I just want to get all of you involved in this network, because there's millions of people they touch and lots of artists. And in the last 10 years, 5 of the Academy Awards documentary films, the winners of Academy Awards, came out of this group. So it's a really good thing, and they are very open in wanting to know scripture, but it's just not through the church, it's through relationships. So I just thank you for letting me be here, and I'd love to bring Creative Visions and Soularize communities into each other. And the founder of it wrote a book called Hope Rising, which is a series of musings. Her son was killed in Somalia 30 years ago, and she always is writing poetry and lyrics. And anyway, it's a beautiful community, and I'm really excited I can merge. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kat. I'm actually local. I'm a Ventura girl, so I'll
Oh,
have to check it out.
well, let's
Oh,
go meet up and have a beer.
nice, nice. All right. So, hey, Spencer, we've got a few minutes left. I want to leave more time for Q&A, but I want you to explain how to participate as a village. Just the, overview, like what's the process?
Right. So on Soularize.live, if you go to Soularize.live, live is actually the .com part of it. So Soularize.live, you can actually apply to host a village. And there's just some very simple questions about how you might want to approach it, how you might think about it. And then if you're selected, which virtually anybody can be selected, we just want to have a relationship with you. It's not a transaction like, oh, pay, the money and now you're in, it's a relational transaction. And so, yeah, Shana just put Soularize.live in the chat. And so what happens is then if you're approved, we will then create a microsite for you. on the website. And that microsite is a place in which you can create your village. And actually, Eugene, I don't want to put you on the spot, but Eugene is doing a village in the Boston area. And so maybe, Eugene, maybe you could just share a little bit of your experience and maybe why you're doing this, hosting a village in Boston. Is that right?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Hi, everyone. I'm Eugene, and like Spencer said, I actually met Spencer only just a few weeks ago. Only ever heard about Soularize just a few weeks ago, so it's all new to me, but I'm really excited. I was particularly compelled by the idea of having this much more collaborative conversation about some of the spiritual innovation that's needed in our world today. And it's related to the work that I'm doing. About a little over a year ago, I started a nonprofit, and we have this crazy, audacious goal to basically reimagine church and spirituality. I knew I couldn't do that alone. I knew that if there's going to be real innovation, it's not going to happen in the brain of one person or even just a bunch of pastors getting together. I'm a former pastor. It would be a multidisciplinary conversation. It would require economists and artists and psychologists and sociologists and all of this knowledge kind of coming together. And so that's essentially what my nonprofit is. It's a conversation with a purpose. Aligns perfectly with the vision of Soularize. And so that's what made me excited about starting a village for the Boston area, is because I think the answer or the way forward is not in me. It is and always has been in the body of Christ. The answer is in the body already. But I think given our different business models, we've sort of kept the body of Christ quite separate and carved up into pieces. And so any vision that brings people together to sort of connect and operate more as a full body is one that I think, it is the way forward. And so I'm excited to try to connect with other people more regionally and provide an opportunity for my community to gather because we've been doing this in the pandemic throughout the entire past year. And so I'm hoping for more connections and more conversations. And I think that's how I think good stuff is going to happen. So that's
thank
a little
you,
bit
Gene.
about why I did that. Yeah.
Love it. I'm going to come back to you in just
Thank
a
you.
second, if it's okay. I want to do a quick screen share just to show you guys what we're talking about here, if that's okay. Oh, you got to give me permission there, Shana. All right, let's see here. Perfect. Okay, so this is basically the Soularize site itself, right? And so you can see across here, we've got home, tickets, workshops, startups, arts, whatever. If you hit villages, you can kind of click in here and it should take you to why host a village, right? And here you can apply, you can download the benefits, or you can find a village, all right? And so if you apply, this is what you would do. You just click here and it'll take you to a simple questionnaire. And you can go through and answer the questions through this, right? So what'll happen then is we'll have, then if you're approved, you'll be brought into this. It's the Hoover app, all right? And in the Hoover app, you can see here, there are villages, all right? And you'll be able to create a village. We'll break them up by areas. So we've got our host village here in Fullerton, right? And there's a video. You could do a welcome video to ask people to be a part of your village. And then here is Eugene's. So you create, basically, we've hacked the system. So it's really what, oh, sorry about that. So what happens is we've hacked the whole system where this is usually exhibitors. And so what you'll do is you'll have a video, you can have your expression, what's going on. People can request more information. You could tell why you're doing what you're doing as a village. You could put up handouts for your village there. And then again, people can find you as, connected through this. So we wanted to try to make it as simple and easy as possible to be able to have people apply. And then without any risk, no cost or anything else. Then if you are accepted, then we will just go ahead and send you a link to be able to build your own village. We don't know how many villages will happen, but the idea is to be able to have them available if people would like to be able to do that. So real quick, just Eugene, maybe a minute or so. How did you find creating the village?
I think it was fairly straightforward. Clearly, the platform is not quite, designed for the purpose that we're using it, but it was easy enough. I was able to enter in text and link to video and upload documents, and I think the biggest benefit I think will be connecting with other people once it gets a little bit more populated. So the process was very straightforward.
Awesome.
The hard work
Excellent.
will be figuring out what we're actually going to do.
Yes. But that's okay. You don't have to worry about it in the sense that it might be built as you're doing it. You know what I mean? Again, it's the minimum viable benefit. You know what I mean? Like, just try to say, how are we going to do this? I hope we're moving away from the place where we think we have to control everything. Melanie asked a question are these villages global? Yes, they are. They can be anywhere. Just so you know, though, the stream will be coming from Fullerton, so that's Pacific Standard Time, but it's all recorded. And we haven't mentioned this before, but we're flipping the workshops, all right? So you can cut and paste the music, you can, use spoken word, whatever, and even the workshops. We're not trying to own anything. So all of the workshops are going to be hosted on YouTube, Vimeo, or wherever they might be posted. So people can see these. The thing that we're hosting in the app is the conversation around them. All right. So we're not trying to lock down any of the content. So for instance, one of our workshop leaders is Becca Stevens. I don't know if you know of her from Thistle Farms. And she's like, oh, I love this. So what she's doing is actually she's scripting and filming Thistle Farms with the women there. And she'll show all of that. They'll be available from September 27th until the 22nd of October, where anybody can view all the workshops. And then the workshop time is the time where you'll engage Becca on what she presented. So it's not a talking face, it's Q&A. So you'll be able to watch all of the workshops, and some of them you might want to show in your particular region if you're in another time zone, and you could just play that workshop and then engage.
Yeah.
But
So it's we're hoping as we collaborate, we're going to be curating content, so to speak. So each village can choose a playlist as they would like. But, it's a wild west out there. And I think that's why we're calling on spiritual entrepreneurs, because you guys are the ones that are going to help us dream. We're going to dream together. We're going to collaborate. So I wanted to open up for any questions. We have 4 minutes left. So any burning questions, just unmute your mic and ask questions. I know it's kind of confusing, so.
What's any revenue could be generated, or how is that?
yes, so with the villages, there's $100 fee to host a village. And basically you could charge anything you want for tickets at the door. We won't sell those or anything else. You do that all on your own. We would hope that you, as a spiritual entrepreneur, would invest it humanely in being able to do, a meal or bring in a DJ or whatever. But you can create any program you want in that way.
Good question. Okay, guys, there's no dumb questions. Please ask.
Could I ask,
yes,
are you active in other countries around the world? I did hear that it was a global.
It's global. It's a global spiritual learning party. So because we've gone hybrid, people can participate from anywhere in the world. We're expecting our first village inquiry was from Australia. So we're excited about getting the global, getting humanity involved.
So yeah, Marilyn's saying she's saying, hey, it's 3 a.m. here in Brisbane, Australia. So that is true. We're not going to try to control anything. It's what you want to do. Again, we're willing to work with you in any way possible. In fact, in a crazy way, we're not sure that all the speakers are going to be willing to travel this year. So some of the speakers might actually do workshops from your local village. And because people in the app, they won't know whether it's from Fullerton or not. In fact, we don't have enough capacity to do all the workshops in Fullerton. We're going to have to do some of these workshops either from villages, or people might do it from their own residence. But
Okay, I
yeah,
think we have time for one more question, and then we would like maybe a last statement from Brian and Amy. One more question, you guys? Come on, give me a really dumb one. All right, Melon.
This is not so much a question, but just a comment. I really appreciated your thoughts, Brian, and everyone, Amy, everyone. It was really interesting, and Eugene, and Spencer, of course. And the dichotomy between economy and theology, maybe it's a false one. And I'm a Sufster, and Sufism. I'm in interfaith. I'm universalist. So it stems from Christianity. I was raised Catholic. In Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was a great businessman. Why? Because he was honest. So within the Islamic tradition, you have the two, ecology and economy and theology are right together. And in Sufism, the goal is to be fully human and fully divine. These dichotomies are maybe are not serving us. So I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you, Melon, so much. Okay, Brian, do you want to make a...
I know our time is short, so let me just say it's great to see all these faces, great to see the creativity. And I think one of the great problems for a lot of people in religious communities is they think that somebody in their organization is going to fix things, the Pope or the bishop or somebody is going to fix it. And I think we're coming to this moment where we realize, you know what, it's probably not going to work that way. It's probably going to be all of us doing what we can do and trusting that we're aligned and unified and synergized by the spirit that we cannot control, but that we can collaborate with. So beautiful to see you all, and look forward to the conversation unfolding in the weeks to come.
Amen, amen. All right, Amy, last thoughts.
So echo all of that. I hate following Brian.
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
Also to say, just to say thank you for your work, because plowing new ground is really, really, really hard. And that's the source of God's work in the future. So I want to say thank you for doing the work that you do. And I'm looking forward to getting to know some of you better.
Beautiful. Thanks, Amy. All right, Spencer, want to close it out?
Yeah, well, just thank you guys so much for being a part of this. If you're interested in doing a village, we'd love for you to just go ahead and apply there, how I showed you, and I'll walk you through whatever you need. Or if you know of anyone else that might be interested in doing something like this, as a crazy thought, I had a couple of people who were like, hey, you know what? I'm actually going to do the village, but I'm going to have a host at my location, and I'm going to go out and do remote from Soularize in Fullerton back to my group. So, people are just thinking crazy, wonderful ideas that they'll actually have a group back home, but they'll be hosting it from Fullerton. So I don't know how you'll do it or what you want to do with it, but we are open. And again, you can always email us here, soularize@spencerburke.com, soularize@spencerburke.com, if you have any questions at all. Thanks again. We're
all right, you guys,
looking
thank
forward
you
to it.
so much for spending an hour with us. Blessings.